I just recently went to a quilt retreat with one of my quilt guilds, the Silicon Valley Modern Quilt Guild. And the week before I was going to go, last minute, I just figured I was in the mood. I would go ahead and decorate some sewing related sugar cookies to bring with me to share with my friends at the retreat. So I made them, had a really good time. It was really fun. And then at the retreat, as often happens, people asked me for my recipes and any tips or like what I did to create the cookies. So I decided I'd just go ahead and create this. So this blog post is half quilt related and half baking related. But I'll just have some tips and links as to which sugar cookie cutters I used that are quilt related and also just my process. And I thought of the idea of creating this tutorial after I'd already made the cookies. Otherwise, I would be able to include a lot more video in showing you what I do. So this is kind of retrospective, and hopefully, the photos that I was able to find from previous times that I've decorated with my nephews and nieces will help. In the future, I may make a new blog post tutorial that actually shows the whole process in video format, but this is the best that I can do for now. So I kind of covered that introductory part. One thing I think it's important to realize that when I make sugar cookies, I plan on a 4-day process. So on the first day, I mix up the dough and I put it in the refrigerator overnight. And then on the next day, I roll out the cookie dough and cut out the shapes. And then those shapes I put back in the refrigerator to chill, and then I go ahead and bake them. The sugar cookies tend to taste better if you bake them the day before you decorate them. You don't have to, but they will taste better. They'll be a better texture. So I bake them on day 2. And then on day 3, I make my royal icing, I color, and I decorate all the cookies. And then I leave them overnight to dry. And then day 4, I'm ready to eat them myself and share them with friends. So that's the general timeline for my process. So on the day that I make the cookie dough, like several years ago, I went ahead and I baked all kinds of different recipes to test which one I liked best for my sugar cookies. Some sugar cookie recipes taste great without icing or a light icing. And because some recipes are sweeter, some recipes are less sweet, some recipes are more like shortbread, they have like a dry texture, and some are more cake-like. There are a lot of different ones. So I tested all the different recipes, and I decided that for me, I preferred this recipe from allrecipes.com, and I've used that recipe over the years. I like it, and everybody else has given me great feedback on enjoying it once I've made the cookies. So I've used that recipe over the years. The recipe itself has great directions with pictures of making the process. So I suggest go ahead and read that recipe for their tips, and I'll just give a few tips here on what I think are the most important essentials to getting the best bake from your cookies. Each single recipe tends to make about 45 cookies. It depends greatly on the size of your cookie cutter, because if you have larger cookie cutters, then that number will dramatically decrease. But if you use like tiny cookie cutters, you could make way more than 45 cookies. But I tend to make 3 or 4 inch cookies, and I get about 45 per batch. So for me, I double the recipe. And the reason why is because I have the larger size KitchenAid. So I can make a double batch at once. So it's easy and convenient just to make a double batch. And the second reason is that if you use the royal icing recipe that's based on a 2-pound bag of confectioner's sugar, it creates a good amount of icing. And so I feel like a double batch of sugar cookies wastes less of that icing. In general, 2 pounds will be a little bit more than you need for a double recipe. You could, make a few more, but I just feel like it's a good proportion that wastes less icing and makes a better use of my time because it takes effort to make the icing. So you want to use as much of it as you can. So follow the recipes instructions, but the big things for me is making sure that your butter is at room temperature. So, like, I'm not talking about summer room temperature where it's extra melty. Like, you want to be able to leave an impression with your finger, but you don't want it so melted that it like starts being oily and like falls apart really easily. Not, you don't want it chilled or hard, but you want it like fairly like have structure, hold its shape, but be softened. And in the photo, you can see my niece threatening to lick the butter thing. But I use that picture because she's holding it sideways and, the butter is still holding its shape and sticking to the paper, which is what you want. And the second thing I strongly recommend for all baked goods, but especially for this recipe, is to weigh your dry ingredients. So example, like for this recipe, I think it's mostly the flour and the sugar. You don't need to weigh ingredients like the salt or the baking powder that are in small amounts, like a teaspoon. But if you weigh your dry ingredients, it's going to end up more precise and will be the consistency that you want. And the next thing is just don't over mix the dough. It's easy in the KitchenAid to like keep mixing until all the flour is absorbed, but often that results in overworked cookie dough. So in this picture, I'm in my classroom harassing middle school students, but you can see how the dough is a little bit shaggy. So you don't want it over mixed or rubbery or smooth. You want it to be kind of shaggy. More so, like more mixed than a biscuit mix, but less, than maybe like chocolate chip cookie dough. Well, actually, you don't want to overmix chocolate chip cookie dough either. My point is don't overmix it. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll stop mixing with the KitchenAid before all the flour is absorbed and do the last couple strokes myself just to get it perfect. And then once you've created that dough, throw it in the refrigerator. I tend to refrigerate mine overnight. You can get away with doing, at least 3 hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours, but it's just more convenient for me. And I'm confident that it will be chilled all the way through if I throw it in the refrigerator overnight. So, and if it's refrigerated, it's going to roll out better. Now, when you're rolling out your cookies, you want to make sure that you have a lot of flour on your surface. And as you roll it out, you can lift up the dough and add more flour. I tend to like roll it out, the big lump, into a flatter thing, lift it up, sprinkle more flour, flip the dough over, and continue to roll out. And you don't want to over flour it because that could affect the texture of the cookies. But if you don't use enough flour, it will stick. And so when you're trying to get the cookies cut out, they'll stick and get warped or misshapen as you're pulling them out of the cookie cutters. So at my sister's house, she has a lovely, I don't know if it's marble or some like smooth structure. And I love cutting out cookies at her house. At my house, I have the old style kitchen tiles with grout. And it's super annoying because the cookie dough will get into the grout and it's hard to clean. So what I actually do is I put out a bath towel and then put a cutting board, my largest cutting board, but smaller than the edge of the bath towel. And I roll it out on the cutting board. And then if any flour or cookie dough goes over the edges, I can just take it out with the towel and shake it outside versus having to scrub all the cookie dough out of the grout. So it helps a lot with cleanup. Now for the best, sugar cookies are pretty thick, not so thick that they're hard to cook, like they might be raw, but not too thin. So I aim for like a little bit over a 1/4 inch. And at school, when I make it with my elementary or middle school students, I bought a special rolling pin that's linked in this section of the blog that has rings on the edge. And you can choose which ring you want that matches the thickness of the cookie dough. At home, I just kind of go with my gut because I have a lot of experience. And I look for, I'm looking for like a really hefty 1/4 inch. You can purchase 3D printed rods that work with any rolling pin that you use, and I have that linked at the bottom of the blog. But then you set those side by side and you roll out on them. It's a little tricky because as you roll cookie dough, it tends to spread wider, and you can accidentally spread the cookies so wide that the rods end up falling outside of the edge of your rolling pin. But the goal is to have a consistent thickness of cookies and have it be fairly thick so that it tastes better, but not too thick so that it's hard to bake. So as you know, like when you roll out cookie dough, you make your first roll out and you cut out the cookies, and then you have to re-roll the scraps. And then, you cut out cookies and you have to re-roll the scraps. And so the more you roll cookie dough out, the more flour you're adding and the more you're working the dough. And so it's affecting the taste and texture of the cookies. It's going to be fine. They're going to taste okay. But your best cookies will always be from the first time you roll the cookie dough out. So I try to teach kids and try myself to be very conscientious about using the cookie dough strategically on the first rollout to get the most cookies possible. And then I tend to roll it out once, and then I'll re-roll the scraps one more time. And then after that, if I have more scraps, I'll put them in the refrigerator and I'll add to that, plate of scraps in the refrigerator from all my future rollouts. And then at the very end, I'll re-roll all of the scraps. And that way it helps the scraps get a little more chilled, which makes them easier to roll out. Like it combats the heat element. There is a running joke in my family that there are cookie cutting professionals and there are cookie cutting criminals. And this again ties back to using the dough strategically. The middle niece, Ollie, is a cookie cutting professional. She tends to be pretty conscientious about cutting out cookies close together. And so she uses the dough more efficiently. And then people who cut in the middle are the criminals. And Ollie will also kind of rotate the cookie cutter above the rolled out cookie dough to see maybe if there's a different angle that would make better use of it before setting it down and actually cutting it. And so that reduces the amount of times that you need to roll it out. You get more cookie per rollout. I also always have a lot of really tiny cookie cutters, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, less than an inch cookie cutters. And so what I do is after I roll out the big ones, I'll use my small cookie cutters to use up the scraps. I have a penguin, a bunny, a heart, different small cookie cutters. And so then I'll use those up, and then that just makes even more use out of that first rollout that's going to taste the best. Mickey loves to torture me as a cookie cutting criminal, and she gives me a really hard time because I'm, it's my pet peeve. I want all the cookies close together, and so she keeps me on my toes and will jokingly just take a bite out of the middle with a cookie cutter. And even more so than even doing it intentionally to harass me, I don't know, it's just natural that you want to just throw the cookies out. You don't think about placing the cutters carefully. You just throw them out in there and you end up wasting some of the cookie dough. So after you've cut the cookies out, I recommend not taking them straight into the oven. First, stack them on a tray and put them back in the refrigerator so that the dough can re-chill. So I tend to have a baking tray, and then I'll cut out my first round of cookies and I'll lay them in one layer, and then I'll cut out my second round of cookies and I'll stack them on top of that first layer and put them back in the fridge while I'm rolling out the third layer. And so usually you can stack them 3 or 4 tall sometimes, and just let the butter in the cookies firm up again and get cold, because if your cookie dough is warm when you put it in the oven, the cookies will spread more and the edges will be less crisp. So if you put them in cold, the outside kind of cooks and sets, and so then it doesn't spread as much as the whole cookie bakes. The cookie dough recipe that I use is cake-like, so it's at even more risk, I feel, for spreading. So that's why I'm super conscious about trying to make sure they're cold. And if you are pressed for time, you can set them on the tray as if you're going to bake them and just put them in your freezer for a couple minutes, and that speeds up the chilling process. and they'll be colder faster, and you can go ahead and bake them. I do bake mine on parchment paper. And I actually reuse that paper for multiple batches. I tend to use, I have two big baking pans. And so I just use one piece of parchment paper and I'll bake a set of cookies. And then the tray itself is hot, but once I've taken the cookies off, I can take the paper off and it's not hot and set it on the cool tray, bake those. And then by the time that tray of cookies is out, the other pan will be cool. And so I alternate between baking pans, but use the same parchment paper. I do not recommend baking two trays at once. I know it takes double the time, but you'll get a much more even bake if you're not trying to juggle two trays. If you try to do two trays, it'll be okay, but you'll have some that are darker and lighter, and it won't be as even of a bake. So I always bake mine one tray at a time. And so and at the halfway point, I turn the tray 180 degrees. I actually turn them a little bit, like a minute or two past the halfway point. For example, let's say you're going to bake them for 10 minutes. My first run, I would set it for 6 minutes and then turn it at 4 minutes. And that's because I feel like in the first 6 minutes, you're bringing it up to temperature as well as baking them. So it ends up more even if you turn them a little bit after halfway, in my personal opinion. Sugar cookies are really easy to bake incorrectly. You can overbake them easy. Sometimes in an effort to not overbake them, the centers can end up raw or wet. My husband actually will eat all of my quote unquote overbaked ones because he likes the cookies a little bit crispier and he doesn't like them iced. But in general, I think you're looking for something that's golden brown on the edges. The center is cooked but very pale. And the edges being like a light golden brown, that's the easiest way for me to identify that they're ready. And you can kind of go by time, but also definitely use your visual judgment. And it does come with experience too. So in this picture, you see that I have two trays that are a single layer. And then in the back, I have stacked cookies on a baking tray. And you can stack them, but they have to be completely cool first. So I tend to use two trays. I have one tray that I'll fill up with cookies. And then my second bake will go on the second tray. And then when my third bake comes out, I'll put the first bake on the stacked tray. So I'm kind of cycling them through. So all of the cookies essentially get two bakes or around like 20 to 30 minutes to completely cool before I try stacking them. So you want to keep them cooling as long as possible without being stacked. And then the stacked cookies, I don't put in a Tupperware or anything like that. I leave them until all of my cookies are baked and the last batch is completely cool. The longer you let them cool out and open in the air, the better they're going to be. And then I tend to box them up in a big Tupperware overnight. The cookies are going to taste better if you wait until the day after you bake them to decorate them. I do not always do this. Sometimes at school when we're doing fundraisers, we may make like almost 1,000 cookies to sell. And so at some point in the production, we're just baking cookies and decorating them as quickly as possible. But if you have time and can wait, they are going to taste better. But if you don't have time and are in a rush, this is an area where you could decorate them the day of. They're going to taste better, and it has to do with the texture. They dry out a little bit before the royal icing seals the moisture in, and it just tastes better. I'm not going to lie, making the royal icing, initially I was like, oh, this is going to be the easy part. Like I made it through cooking the cookie cutters and all of that. But oh my gosh, it is a workout, and it is like your muscles in your arm and your wrists get really fatigued. Luckily for me, every once in a while, I get to bake with my niece who is tiny, but incredibly strong. I think it's the team gymnastics, but she like paces me icing batch for icing batch and cuts my work in half. So if you have a friend, an adult, or a kid who is willing, eager, and able to follow directions, then it's good to have a buddy for this part. It'll make it more enjoyable. For a long time, I used Wilton's meringue powder. Wilton's actually has two products. Well, let me back up. So meringue, you can make royal icing from eggs, fresh eggs. I don't. I use meringue powder, which is some egg product. And it's easy to find at Michael's in the baking section. The Wilton's brands. There's two products. One is a color flow mix and one is labeled meringue powder. I've used them pretty interchangeably. There is a slight difference in the texture when you're done. So if they have both, I would go with color flow, but essentially either one will work interchangeably. And if you do use the Wilton's, one of their products, then I follow the recipe from Sweet Sugar Belle and it's linked here. And again, it's an excellent recipe with also like photos and tutorials of what to do and what you're looking for. So just follow her process. And I used that for years. And just recently, I discovered a different product that's Jeannie's Dream Premium Meringue Powder, and I am obsessed with it. It is more expensive, and you do have to order it in advance and wait for it to arrive. I haven't found it at a local store yet, but I love it. So again, it's Jeannie's Dream Premium Meringue Powder. And it's linked here so you can take a look at it. If you use that product, follow her directions on the back. It's similar to Sweet Sugar Belle's recipe, but the difference is her meringue powder behaves a little bit differently than Wilton's. So you do want to follow her recipe. And if you've never made royal icing before, but you want to use the Jeannie's Dream, you can look at the Sweet Sugar Belle's recipe for her process and have like an idea of the big picture concept, but then tweak the recipe to follow what's on the package for the Jeannie's Dream meringue powder. Yeah, it's just slightly different with the process and also with the amounts of other ingredients. And I do use almond flavoring when I make my meringue powder. On the back of Jeannie's, she recommends vanilla, but I tend to use almond extract. And I use it for two reasons. One is because I like the taste. The cookies, I use vanilla, and then with the icing, I use almond extract. And I think it's a nice balance. It makes it a little more complex in flavor. And then the other thing is that almond extract tends not to have any innate color, whereas most vanillas will have a brown color. And if you use it, it'll be okay. But if you want to decorate your cookies with white, it'll be slightly tinted from the vanilla. Whereas the almond extract, because it's clear, won't affect the color of your white icing. But if you only have vanilla, use vanilla, it'll be fine. I am not going to go in depth on this topic. It is a rabbit hole. I have a couple links here you can read. You can do a Google search and find more. But the basic concept is that royal icing consistencies, you have to take the big batch that is thicker and boil it down, like scoop some out, add color, and make that color the perfect consistency for its purpose during the cookie decorating process. And the labels for these kinds of icing consistencies are based on the time that it takes for a drizzle of the icing on top of the remaining icing in the bowl to morph back into the icing, like to settle out from the lines of the dribble into a flat surface. So the amount of seconds that it takes for the icing to become flat again after drizzling is going to correspond to the labels of icing, if that makes sense. So for me, I use, some people call it 15-second icing. Some people call it 20-second icing. Some people go for 17-second icing. But essentially, I use something between 15 and 20 seconds icing. And that is for the base layer of my cookies. And then when I'm adding details, I use a thicker icing that is piping consistency. And piping consistency can be hard to squeeze out of the bottles, whereas 15 to 20 seconds icing takes a lot less work. Now, there are other techniques where you can have one consistency for outlining and one consistency for flooding. And I did use those in the past, but I find it easier just to make one medium range icing from the base of my cookies. It saves me time. And so what I tend to do is will use the 15 to 20-second icing to make the base layer of my cookies. And sometimes after you're done decorating them, you can be maybe perhaps a little disappointed in what they look like. But when you add the piping details on top, it's amazing what a lift you get in like just the aesthetic of the cookie. So if you're discouraged or, feel like your cookies aren't measuring up after the base layer of decorating, don't worry, add the piping and you're going to be much happier. So I mix up the big batch and then I scoop out icing into a smaller container and I add the coloring first because there is a minute chance that the liquid in the food coloring might change the consistency. So add it first and then add the water. If you're trying to stir in the color and you realize that it's too thick, don't try to stir in all of the color before adding the water. You can go ahead and add water and then it'll be easier on your muscles to stir it in. I use a spray bottle for adding liquid because it's easier to add a small amount and not accidentally over add water. And I always bring the smaller bowl of icing to piping consistency first. And again, use that article if you're looking for details on that. And then once I've pulled out some of the icing for the thicker piping, I'll add more water to the same batch for the 15 to 20-second base layer icing. And in that way, my colors always match. So I don't mix the two separately. There are different ways to get color into your icing. There's regular food coloring, there's gel food colorings. I tend to use Wilton's Color Right Performance Color System. And I use that because it's in these little bottles that are really easy versus trying to scoop out icing from a gel container. And then it also has a pamphlet inside that will tell you specific like numbers of drops and combinations of drops to get different colors. So I bought the entire kit the first time, and then as I use it and I run out of an individual color, I just buy that individual color again. So I don't have to buy the whole kit again, which I think is also convenient. For ways to pipe it, I've used bags, I've used parchment paper that's been wrapped, I've used plastic bags that you can throw away, I've used reusable piping bags, I've used bottles of different kinds, and I find that the easiest thing to use is bottles that have a wide mouth opening and that are compatible with icing tips. I got mine at Michael's, and I recommend getting like the larger size bottle, but it's not huge. And if you want to get like a smaller, they come in two sizes. So if you get the smaller ones, they're great for piping because you don't need as much piping icing. And then you can get the larger bottles for the 15 to 20-second icing that's forming your base layer. And when you pour it in there, if you have the bowl or container, the mixing bowl, a little higher away from the mouth of the bottle, the icing will come out thick and then like taper down into a thin stream that will go in the bottle easily. Royal icing dries out really quickly. So you can buy these silicone caps for bottles that are great as long as when you're icing, you remember to recap them when you change colors. Or you can get like one of the circular plastic takeout containers that sometimes you get from like Thai food. Put a damp cloth or paper towel on the bottom and just tip the bottles over and have them rest on that surface. And that way the tips won't dry out, because if they do dry out and you squeeze, then you can't get the icing out or you get a clump of icing. And you want to try to avoid that. So now for decorating cookies, especially if you're working with kids, you want them to have fun and be creative and not have any kind of stress for making them look a certain way. And what I tend to do with kids is I ask them to make 4 cookies with me, and I teach them basic techniques using those 4 cookies. And then I let them just go ahead and decorate future cookies any way they want. And it's a nice balance because kids will they'll be like, okay, I can make 4 cookies with you. And then once they learn those techniques, a lot of times those same techniques that I've taught will show up in their free creative cookies later. Sometimes they won't, and that's also fine. But it's no fun if you're trying to make kids make like if you stifle their creativity by trying to make them follow certain rules. So yeah, let them be creative. Let yourself be creative. Accept whatever outcome you get with the cookies. They will all taste the same. And just try to let it be fun and creative. And then over time, the more you practice, it'll be easier to incorporate some of these techniques. And the first thing I do is I just have them make one solid one color cookie and practice using the 15 to 20 second base layer icing. And I tend to have them outline the cookie first and then fill it kind of using a circular motion to cover the inside smoothly. And so again, with 15 to 20 second icing, you use the same icing both for the outline and for the filling. It's unlike other different icing techniques where you use one type for the outline and a different type to flood the center. We've combined those into one icing. And you can see Ollie here forgot to outline her cookie, but her circular technique of filling the cookie is going great. And it worked out fine. It was pretty successful because her technique of filling was right and she was able to get the outline to be smooth. But if you do the outline first, the edges of your cookie will just look a lot more polished and smooth. So after we've made that base layer cookie, I have them make another base layer cookie, but this time right away while the base layer icing is still wet, I have them switch to a different icing bottle and make polka dots. And the trick here is that these polka dots are gonna like sink into the surface of the base layer. They're not gonna sit on top. And it ends up being super cute. The goal is once you pipe the polka dot, you want your tip to come up and the tip of the polka dot to come directly straight up. And then it will settle into a perfect polka dot. If the tip falls over to the side, it happens to all of us, but it will look a little funny. It'll look like a polka dot with like a little stick coming out of it. Think of like a chocolate chip. You want it to be wide and then come up, and then it will sink in and become smooth. You can also, if you want polka dots that are on the surface, that hold their shape on the surface, then you would do your base layer, let it dry, and then pipe polka dots with your piping icing that's thicker, and then those will sit on top of the cookie or on top of the icing. So now you can easily make hearts. Some of us are better at this than others of us. And they're very artistic at times. But what you do is you make polka dots, and then right after, while everything is still wet, you get a skewer and you start in the background color and go straight down through the polka dot. So for this cookie, I started in the pink and went straight through the yellow. And then you can stop whenever you're satisfied with the lower point of your heart. So they are pretty easy. You can also connect your hearts. So if you have all the polka dots, you can draw a straight line through them and they'll end up with like connected hearts. So you see my nephew, he has a cookie with the letters SWIM, S-W-I-M. So he did his base layer and then he piped single polka dots in a line throughout the letters. And then now he's creating connected hearts by tracing through them without lifting his skewer. And on this, the pink long rectangular cookie, I piped blue polka dots first and turned them into connected hearts, then let them dry. And then using my piping consistency, I added the white hearts on top of it. So on this cat cookie that I'm holding, it's a really, really pretty technique. It's called feathering. I guess it kind of looks like feathers. I'm not sure. But people are like, oh my gosh, it looks so amazing. It's so professional. It must be so hard. But it's honestly one of the easiest techniques. And it gets the most, people get really impressed by it. And so it pays off considering how simple it is to accomplish. So what you do, again, you're not using your piping icing. You're using that more liquidy 15 to 20 second icing. And so you outline the shape of your cookie. So go around the whole edge of the cookie. And then using that same color, you're going to create stripes, but not like too close together, like have gaps in between your stripes. And then you add a second color in those gaps, just along the stripes. And sometimes you can add 3 colors. As much space as you leave between, you can add different colors. And you want the stripes to not overflow into each other or become so much that they overflow the outer edges. But you do want them to be touching each other and in close proximity, so it kind of fills up the whole cookie. So once you have all of those stripes laid down, you can take a skewer or a toothpick, some pointy object, and draw a line on the edge of the cookie straight down towards you. Then move over a little bit, maybe like, I don't know, a quarter of an inch or something like that, and draw a line up in the opposite direction. And then scoot over and draw a line towards you. And as you alternate the directions that you're dragging your skewer through the stripes, you'll get this feathering. Sometimes you end up doing them all down. You're like, oh, it's beautiful. But I promise you, like try doing them alternating and you'll see that it's even better. Like it makes a big difference. So here, in the first picture, Ollie is starting. You can see she has the outline and she's drawing her lines. And then my oldest niece is almost done adding the colors in her lines. And then my sister Christy is helping my nephew Zeke draw the lines with the skewer, dragging the skewer through the wet icing to create the feathering. Okay, so now that we finished the base layer, it needs to be kind of dry. Dry enough that it can hold the structure of any piping that you add on top of it. And the piping is hard sometimes because it's more thick, but also I like to use a number 2 tip, which means that you're taking thicker icing through a smaller hole in order to create these details. So if I'm smart and strategic, which I try to be, but not always, I try to, if I have an idea or design in mind that's going to require piping, I try to make those base layer cookies, decorate the base layer first. And then I move on to cookies that I don't plan on adding icing. And by the time I'm done with that second set of cookies, the first set of cookies is dry enough that I can safely start piping. And you'll notice that it's drier because it'll look a little dull and like the icing loses some of its shine. And then, you know that it's on its way to becoming more dry. So you're not looking for something that's super wet. You're looking for an icing that is starting to crisp up. Honestly, piping adds amazing details to cookies and makes them a lot more impressive. So I have a bunch of photos of the cookies that I made recently that are quilting related. And some of them, like you can notice, like my scissors cookies are very little piping. They just have piped circles or hearts for the bolts that connect the 2 blades. And then other ones of my cookies, like the rulers, have more details with the line marks for the measurements and then the numbers. And for the spools of thread, what I did was I created like the same, like a base layer, like say for example, the hot pink thread. Created that pink base layer and then I piped with thicker icing, squiggles for the thread. Then I added a needle and then I piped a few more on top of it so it looks like the needle is tucked into the threads. I'm going to say my pin cushions are a little rough. I plan on working on them. Some of them are supposed to look like the old-fashioned red tomato pin cushions. And then other ones were intended to look like more like just fabric or, other pin cushions that don't follow that traditional shape. The sewing machines were so fun to make, like combining different designs, adding piping details like the reverse level or the dial on the front, the branding line. And then for the final cookies that I made, I just had simple hearts and square cookies that I created like crazy quilt patches on it. And so I added the base layer shapes first. And then once it had dried, I just added X's or zigzags or straight lines to indicate the stitching. And it really like just made them look super cute and creative. Anytime I'm doing a theme for cookies, I will do a Google image search or a Pinterest search and see what the professionals are doing. And there are some amazing cookies out there. And then I try to kind of replicate them in, my own charming, less skilled, fun, creative way. So they look kind of like the professional cookies. So once you've got all of the cookies decorated, everything is set, you've piped everything, leave them out overnight. There's a small chance like maybe you did them early in the morning and then like by bedtime you can pack them away, but you really want the icing dry and you want the cookies to have a little more time out in the open air. You don't want to stack cookies you think are dry but aren't, and then end up like having their icing messed up or having them stick to each other. Don't worry about it. The cookies are going to taste better at this point if they get a little more fresh air. Keep all your pets, dogs, cats away, and all the humans who might be tempted. My sister's dogs, man, I really have to guard the cookies when I'm at her house. But yeah, just set everybody's expectations that you can't have the cookies at this point. My dad, the kid's grandfather, is the worst. He just, is ready for those cookies as soon as they look pretty. But if you're working with kids, it's good to like set their expectations. We don't get to eat the cookies the day we decorate them. We have to wait until the next day so that they're not disappointed or sad. Like communicate early in advance because you feel like you're done once you've decorated the cookies. But if you wait until they're dry, you'll be much happier. It'll taste much better. And that crispy texture with the soft cookie is going to be excellent. So it's worth that wait. And at this point, I just put several links in for cookie cutters that I used in the pictures that you see here, and also some that I actually bought on Etsy and ended up not arriving on time. So I have like a rotary cutter and I have an old-fashioned scissor cookie cutter. I have a seam ripper and cookie cutters that have like different traditional quilt blocks. And I'm excited to use those in the future, but they didn't get here in time for me to make them this time around. And again, I don't get anything from these links. It's not like I'm an affiliate with any of these companies. It's just what I like, what I've used, make it easier for you, and you can decide if you want to use them for yourself. If you're brave and you actually make these cookies, let me know how it went. And if you have any questions, also leave me a message in the comments or contact me on Instagram and I'm happy to answer.